Okay, we're back. Hi everyone. I've decided that, cookies aren't that great and chocolate is better. So I'm going to change this to pieces of chocolate. Okay. And over here, om nom nom is a bit too plain. So I'm going to put in some chocolate over here. So I'm going to type in Control Command Spacebar. That's a pretty useful little keyboard shortcut on the Mac and iOS. And I'm going to search for chocolate. There we go. And I'm going to put it over here. So of course, feel free to make your buttons look different and decorate with things and change this to something that's more relevant to your life. So for me, chocolate. Fredo's still here. Okay, so this thing over here still says print bye-bye cookie. You know what? We don't need this line, right? We don't need this line. This line of code was a bit of a placeholder code that just helped us indicate whether the button was working. When we're done with it, you can either comment it out or you can delete it. So I'm going to delete this line of code. So your code should look something like this. Our next goal is to print stuff below the button to tell the user that they're eating maybe a bit too much chocolate. So where does this line of text go? This line of text should go below the button over here. And if you think through how your layout works, you're in a VStack, you're just going to need to put this text underneath your button. Okay? So let's try it out. So I'm going to put the piece of text under my button. Okay? And I know that the ending curly brace of the button is right here, right? It's at the end of this label. And I'm going to press enter. I'm going to type text. And I'm going to say, don't eat so much chocolate. And that's a bit unfair, right? I've eaten 0 pieces of chocolate and you're telling me not to eat so much chocolate. That's not nice, right? So what we want to do is we want to show a message that's based on what the counter value is. Maybe 20 pieces, right? Maybe 20 pieces and above is too many, all right? Maybe 30 and above is, a bit risky for your health, and 40 and above is life-threatening, right? So you want to have a really serious message for that. So let's do that. Okay, let's do that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce an if statement. Do you remember if statements? Those are ways of asking Swift to make decisions for you based on some input. So what we want to do is we want to tell the user that it's okay to eat chocolate if you haven't eaten 20 pieces. By the way, please don't take this as medical advice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this thing from don't eat so much chocolate to go ahead, eat more chocolate. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to put a thumbs up sign here as well. All right. Where's my thumbs up? There you go. But now, if I tap on this, it's going to remain as this message even after it hits a ludicrous number, like 20 pieces of chocolate. How do we make this thing change when the counter has reached 20 and above? Well, anything that needs to be changed on the screen should be declared as a state variable. Remember what we did just now? This number right here started off as 0 and now it's 31, and we declared that as a state variable. So now I'm going to declare a new state variable called message. And I'm going to put in our initial message over here. Go ahead, eat more chocolate. And I'm going to paste it inside here. Okay. And instead of displaying text with that string, I'm going to put in text bracket message. Text message. Not that funny, but you get the idea. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in a conditional to change the message when my counter has increased beyond a certain limit. And that's right here inside the button's action. So we evaluate every single time the button is pressed whether the counter has gone beyond a certain limit. So I'm going to say if counter is greater than or equals, 20, right? 1 to 19 pieces of chocolate, no problem. 20, terrible. Message equals to don't eat so much chocolate, please. Okay? So maybe give a worried face. Is there a worried? Wait, that's not worried at all. Okay. All right. So let's choose one of these spaces. Okay. And let's try it out. So I'm going to tap on this. I've eaten 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. Yay. Tap, 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 tap. And watch carefully when I reach 19. If I tap it's going to change the message for me. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty simple. What I'd like you to do is to pause the video right now and try and add in a couple more messages for when the counter reaches 30 and when it reaches 40. Where do you add these if statements? Do you use else if? Do you start from 40 first and then 30 and then 20, or the other way around? Right? I'd like you to figure these out and just put in some different messages. So let's pause the video here and try it out. Did you pause the video? I never believe anyone, so I don't think you paused the video. But let me show you a couple of ways to solve this. Okay? So you might be thinking, well, why don't I do this? Right? Well, not delete the curly brace. Do this. Well, else if counter greater than or equals to 30, right? Message equals, oops. Give me a moment. Greater than or equals 30. You cannot actually put a space between greater than or equals. Message equals to, oh no, you're going to die an early death. Okay? And maybe a face palm. All right. So let's try this, right? And you notice that once I edit my code, my app preview actually resets. So it's really convenient. I can actually start testing again from 0. So test it all the way to 20. All right, so far so good. Don't need so much chocolate, please. But when I reach 30, nope, it doesn't work. And why? That's because your conditions are overlapping, right? What happens here is that your counter has increased to, I think, 30 something, but it fulfills this condition, so it only runs this code and it ignores the next condition. So if you really wanted this to work, you could start by flipping your order of your conditionals by testing 40 first, then 30, then 20. But here's a trick. You can also do this. You can also say a separate if statement. Okay? So what's actually happening here and why does this work? Let me first prove to you that it works by tapping on my screen viciously. Tap, 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 tap. 20 is fine. And so is 30. Okay? Why does this work? Well, this works because after it evaluates 20, right, it continues to evaluate the next condition, which means that you're making Swift do an extra bit of work. And yes, you're making Swift do quite a lot of work every time you tap the button. Every time you tap the button, not only are you increasing the counter by 1, but you're making Swift do 2 checks. Even though in our brain, you know that if it's 2, you don't need to run any of the if statements. But this is the way computers think. Okay? We instinctively know that it can skip these 2 conditions, but Swift doesn't. So it just evaluates the conditions and it's perfectly fine because your iOS device is super fast and it can evaluate these conditions really quickly. So just let it be. It's fine. All right. So I'm going to add in the second condition, which is my third condition, sorry. If counter greater than or equals to 40, right? Message equals to, I hope you have health insurance. And I guess I'll put an angry face over here. Okay, so that's way too much chocolate for anyone. So once again, here's a good practice. Every time you finish writing a new piece of code, just test it out. Right, just test it out. It's much better than writing a whole bunch of code and then it not working. Right, so test out bit by bit. If you're watching this video and doing things along with me, I encourage you to pause the video often and type out the code and try things out. Okay, so over here, there we go. Right, once it reaches 40, you get a very demoralizing message and you realize that, you're living your life wrong and you shouldn't be eating so much chocolate.